Welcome to Insight-Driven Decisions, how leaders turn insight into strategic impact. Our goal is helping you move from insight to impact to action, and doing all this through decision-grade insights.
Hello, friends. I'm John Burshek. I'm joined by John Willie. More about us in a bit. Today, we're talking about why customer intelligence rarely shapes strategy and what business leaders actually need instead. Yes, long title, but this episode deserves it. As you will see, there's going to be a lot going on in this one. If you've listened to the others, this is where the rubber meets the road, as I would say. So here's a question I just want to start with. So to the leaders listening, and you can be in marketing or C-level at some point or some department within a company, or you can be an agency lead. If you're a leader, you're making decisions, you're going to be impacting the company. If your company is investing millions in customer data, analytics, and research, why are your biggest decisions still largely made by instinct? And I just don't think it's because leaders ignore insight, but mostly my hypothesis in this is because organizations don't design intelligence to really enter the decision-making process. And to me, I think that's where the architecture is missing, the insight becoming activity, not influence, but just activity. So today we're going to unpack why that happens and what can be done about it with two types of stories here. One about how it's being done now in probably 95% of the companies, according to what we have learned, and then how it can be done and the difference in the impact as far as the actual company success. So welcome back. I'm John Burshek. Most of my career has been spent outside of companies, working with all types and sizes of companies, from the biggest in the world, the Amazons and Apples, all the way through to venture startups. My whole goal across these years has been basically just helping leadership teams design customer intelligence and insight that actually changes what happens in the business in real world success metrics. And John Willie, how about you? Tell us about yourself there.
I've spent most of my career in audience insights, audience analysis, customer insights, and supporting corporate decision makers in terms of primarily in media for content creation, content distribution, sales strategy, acquisition strategy, scheduling, programming, all kinds of things like that. So basically trying to support the decision makers inside the company.
I think this story today that we're going to start off with, you'll find interesting. Basically, as you've heard, we're on both sides of the same problem, so to speak, designing insight, watching what happens, and then trying to understand what really does happen when it meets a real decision environment. Quickly, a recap of 1 and 2. In episode 1, we introduced a core breakdown, and what we called it was the decision design problem, identifying it as the insight versus the decision gap. Organizations generate a bunch of insight, but very rarely changes what leaders decide. Then we went a little bit further. In episode 2, we introduced the idea of decision-grade intelligence, and that's insight that is specifically designed to reduce uncertainty for a decision a leader actually owns. And we talked there about the insight power versus the decision power matrix, and most insight being created in environments with very low decision power. Today, we're going to go deeper. We're asking, why then do leadership teams keep building and spending enormous amounts on intelligent systems that rarely influence any of the major decisions that they make? So if you're a leader listening to this, this is a question for you. And this is real life. This is not theory. In fact, I have a story that I'm going to be talking about to you right now. This is just happened this last week. It's as if this person was reading our notes from the last 2 times. And this is what I was told. So I had a consultation with a head of customer insights, one of the largest global leaders in their industry. That's the company that she worked with. She shared some things that were not only fascinating, but sounded like she wanted to be a case study for us. That wasn't it all, though. She just said the stuff that we're talking about as real life issues she faces. Here's the deal. Her company runs a massive customer experience program. Like I said, they're the 5th largest in the global environment for their industry, fifth largest company. So they have a customer experience program. They operate a major brand trackers. They monitor competitors continuously. They do all of this with some of the largest research firms in the world. They also run extensive internal research through platforms like Qualtrics. In other words, this organization invests heavily in understanding its customers. But she said something that I thought was very revealing. She said, all of that, John, and here's our big problem, which is why I was talking to her. This is the consulting call. We don't have a seat at the table, any table, not the decisions table, not the strategy conversations table, not when the company is deciding about anything about where to go next. And it's not like we're not very busy. Everybody here can figure out how to keep ourselves busy. But we don't have, and this is her words, we don't have a North Star for what we're doing. So I want you to just think about this for a moment. If you're a leader and this person is in your organization, this is an organization producing enormous amounts of customer insight, and yet the people closest to that intelligence still aren't being asked to include their intelligence in real world, make it or break it business decisions. And then she said something more, I thought more revealing. She said, in order to get a seat at the table, we know we need to be thought leaders, but we don't know what prioritized problems demand the information we can provide. So in other words, she's saying, we have the insight capability, but we don't know the decisions the organization is actually needing help in making. The most interesting part, again, just the story just kind of keeps building. This company is bringing in a new chief marketing officer. And of course, Johnny, you know what I would recommend, and I did recommend it. It's like, yeah, you got to walk down the hall, knock on the door and say, I'm here. Let's go fix this thing and make something happen for you. I think instead of the way that you responded, John, I was actually very stunned. I had an absolute no that came back. And it was genuine, I'm going to call it fear for lack of a better interpretation of the emotion. I don't know why, but there was no way this person was going to go to the new CMO and ask, hey, we've got this great group over here. We've got a lot of stuff in play. I think we can help you hit your goals. What problems should we actually be helping you solve? That conversation captures the exact challenge we're unpacking today, because even with all of that, knowing what should be done with the power to potentially do it, nothing is going to happen because she said no. So obviously, we have an insight team that has an influence and a decision power problem. And you can see the previous episodes for definitions of those. They have an opportunity to correct it with the new leadership coming on board, and they refuse to take the risk of doing that onto themselves. There's literally no helping them at this point to earn a seat at the table, as they have no interest in actually understanding anything about the table itself. But there's even more. I think it also reveals another thing, and this is important to leaders who are listening, not just practitioners who may be also overhearing this conversation. For me, it illustrated what I call my overarching hypothesis that one of the biggest contributors to the gap between insight and decisions occurred in this company. And we've talked about this on the previous episodes. And that is a very serious leadership decision-making design problem. Organizations will use what they're given by their company, and that's what this company is doing. If you remember the last episode, the decision, insight, power matrix, this company has two things going on simultaneously. First is the insights team is in the activity delusion quadrant. They're doing a lot of low insight work, low decision power, and that's the quadrant that they're in. Secondly, the leadership is acting in the leadership guesswork quadrant, low insight to no insight coming from the insight group, and high decision power. So if intelligence never enters that discussion in any way, shape, and form, can we conclude it's mostly because leadership never designed how it should, or is it we have an insight team that is just not able to demand the power that they should have. So, John, you've been on the inside in these many corporations. I'm sure you've run into something similar to this. Share what you think on it.
I would say that this person actually, in some respects, has a very first world rich problem because I've been in several very large companies. And, from on the corporate side, it wouldn't be surprising to hear that the mantra for the last several years, pretty much for your whole career is, learn to do more with less, learn to do more with less. And so, you have resources peeled away, you have manpower peeled away, and you're, struggling to keep up with the day to day more than anything. And then I would hear requests from the C-level saying, why aren't you out on these panels? Why aren't you propounding, industry moving ideas and things? Because, well, I don't have time. If we want to continue to make money and you want your salespeople to be supported, I need to do that rather than spend my time over here doing that. It's interesting that seems to be a great example of what we discussed last week, which was the lack of a bridge between the decision makers and the insights team. I mean, the fact that there doesn't seem to be any like equity investment between the two so that she understands what the problem prioritizations are and they understand what her group's capabilities are. But they are asking for thought leadership. And it provides her an opportunity if she doesn't really know what the problem prioritizations are within the company and she's too scared to walk down the hall to speak to the CMO. That's an opportunity to actually show some initiative and think outside the box a little bit and say, what's something that they're not thinking about that maybe I could bring to their attention, right? That's
Right.
something that sometimes we discussed, I think, in the first episode too. Once in a while, you'll learn that the decision makers don't actually know what the question is that needs to be asked. They may not be asking the right question. They may not know what to ask. And this is an opportunity to think outside the box and to be able to bring something to somebody and say, okay, maybe I am sure beyond belief that she is probably, I'm sure she's scared as hell that she's going to walk down there and say, okay, what do you want me to work on? And they're going to go, you don't know? Split. What the hell's the matter with you? This is all we've been talking about for like months. What the hell?
Where were you?
I guarantee you that's where the fear comes in because she's afraid to look naked or stupid in front of the new CMO. But the opportunity then is, okay, then show what you're capable of and bring something to the table that they may not be thinking about at all, right? That is something that they should be thinking about. Be a thought leader within your own organization. Bring something to the table, show what you can do, and then that begins to build a bridge because then they'll go like, oh wow, those people are really smart. That is thought leadership. That is creative thinking. That is imaginative design. We should utilize her more. We should bring her into more meetings. That's one thought.
And John, explain because I know you've done this, so it's kind of teeing the ball up for you here. I know you have done this where you actually have taken things to leadership. This person is, for whatever reason, is just not wanting to do that. But I guess I'm trying to reframe the perspective. You didn't just go to them and go, hey, you know what, guys? This will solve all the problems. Hold on. We need a new dashboard.
Right.
In fact, I've got an idea for another tracker. Where I'm trying to go with this is, again, what we've been talking about is whether you called it that or not, you had a decision architecture in your mind. You had some way of knowing where the company wanted to go. It could have just been innate. I don't know. Maybe you were in those meetings and actually did take notes. You can tell us in a bit. But I mean, you knew there was going to be a decision, and what you were proposing was not more of the same. It was a solution, was it not?
Yeah. One of the things that comes to mind right now is I was at a company that was trying very desperately to reinvent themselves. It was going to be a rebrand, a complete rebrand. A lot of that was because the leadership at the time just didn't enjoy or appreciate the type of content that they were responsible for at that point, this network. They wanted to completely re-wallpaper it and rebuild it, but they didn't know to what. And so, to his credit, he actually put out a thing. He goes, you know what? We're going to have a meeting and everybody can come in with their own idea and tell me what it is and make me believe that this is what we should do. And so people went off and did this and that and the other thing and came back with all of these ideas. And most of the ideas were about like what was hot and heavy at the time, what was grabbing attention and headlines at that point. And I came in and said, what we really need to do is just double down on what we're doing now. And I had so much information that was both qualitative and quantitative as to why it would make sense to just stay in your lane, like really stay in your lane, but own it, because nobody else is even dabbling in it. There's no other place to go for this. Stay here, double down, go out and make this acquisition, because I'm telling you, this acquisition is going to be a big deal. And I showed John across the entire competitive landscape. There was nobody else in it. There was nobody else doing it. And I even went out and I said, there were, at that point, the really large networks were dabbling in it. And I showed them, I said, if you could get even 0.5% of that audience, which loves what you're doing, to come over and just try you out, this is what your numbers would look like. And I was known as the old fashioned guy, or the stick in the mud guy, or the old school guy. Anyway, bottom line is, I thought it was a great presentation because it was all fact based. And I even had showed another example of another network that attempted to do the same thing and how it hadn't paid off for them. Again, qualitative and quantitative. And I think it was actually the reason why they showed me the door eventually. Because it just wasn't what they wanted to hear. So in that case, I think the decision actually was sort of like already made, because I felt like the argument, and I know it probably sounds self-serving, but I think the argument that I made and the proposal that I had made a lot of sense if they were to go that way. As it happens, the acquisition that I championed in my presentation, they wound up making. And even now, better than like a decade later, it is the core, it is the core engine of this network to this day. It's like they put it on, they tried to bury it because the guy didn't want to show me any love at all. So he buried it in the middle of the night and people still watched it. And so they had no choice but to start airing it more and more. And pretty soon it was like the whole schedule. So in a sense, they almost did wind up doing what I had suggested to them. But that was an idea. I know that when I made that presentation, I know that was not in their head at all. They did not expect somebody to come in and say, you know what, you should stick in your lane, and I'm not going to claim that it was thought leadership, but it was in a sense of saying, I know that wasn't in their head at all. They expected everybody to come in and say, do this, pivot this way, pivot that way, grab this, grab that, go this way, that way. And they all wanted to be in a far more competitive space against better resourced competitors who had a lot more brand equity and brand recognition at the time, which, and so in a way, the idea that I did present was something that they hadn't thought of. But because it wasn't sexy, it was like, they appreciated the work, they appreciated the idea, they understood, but it wasn't sexy. I was like, and so that's fine. That's one of those cases where at the end of the day, I probably paid the price, but I don't care because I know it was good. And it actually wound up being the right,
It was the right choice that they were forced into making. You drug them kicking and screaming into making a decision that they didn't want to make and certainly didn't want to give you credit for. So if you're a leader listening to this, maybe there is a reason, because you're kind of echoing why there might be fear with the lady I was talking to on the consult call. I mean, that would, if you had an inkling that you could be showing the door because of that thought process, would you have done it still?
Well, me personally, yes, but I understand why somebody wouldn't, because If I wanted to keep my job, then I would have said, oh, let's do some reality and let's do some drama and let's do some backstage, this and that and the other thing and all that. And then I would have gone in there and I wouldn't have believed it myself personally.
Right.
But I did believe that, I mean, I present what I thought was best for the company, and all of the data that I had collected and looked at told me, like, you guys can own this space and keep everybody out. You can be the only place for it. There was a guy that we used to do some work with a long time ago, really smart guy. I really like him a lot. And he always used to say, the fastest way, and this could apply to probably any business, honestly, but in regards to television, he said, the fastest way to get better ratings is to make the people that love you a little bit more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Instead
Easiest place to sell is with your current customer. Yeah.
Get the people that love you to love you a little bit more. And so, anyways, but I would have done it anyway, John. Yes. I would have done it anyway.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess
there's no glory in saying told you so, but what,
No, you're laying there in the frontier and you got the arrow in your back. It gets lonely out there as, tumbleweeds are blowing by you. I think we've both been there for respectively the same purposes.
You said something like what pioneers get arrows in their back or something like that.
Exactly. So if you're a listener as a leader and you're thinking the world works like this, there's a question that you need to answer. There's insight you get. There's some kind of a decision you're going to make, and then you're going to act on it. You're probably thinking like most people think, but that's, as we're just sharing, it's not the way it actually takes place. So there's definitely even steps along that besides just the fear factor that both you heard John just speak of, and then the lady in the very first story. There's also different areas where the breakdown can happen. I call this the insight failure chain, if you will. So we had that. If you think it happens, that there's a question, there's an insight, there's a decision, there's action, then there's breakdowns across that whole line as well before you even get to where you're actually very convinced about what you're sharing and you get to be told there's a door anyway. So the first one, I know that you've talked about this one before, and this is really trying to set the difference up between insight that is just describing a situation, or like what she was doing. We know where we're at. We know what our competitors are at. We know how our brand is faring, our CX program. We know our service department. That's basic information. So what we're really talking about, they want to get bigger. Now they're at another step where they have to go beyond that basic stuff that she's producing and still nobody's listening to. And that's where we talked last time, decision grade insight. And it has to come down to reducing that uncertainty for the choice. So the first one that is the real failure is this question failure. And that's where the wrong question gets asked. Insights are just interesting. No uncertainty in terms of what the leader is facing is being reduced from their perspective. Anything, I know you've had those situations before where you've dealt with that.
Yeah, so, absolutely. I mentioned, I think on the first one, it's important. This is an opportunity for the woman that you brought up in that story too, is that sometimes the person that you're supporting, right, they may not understand or know the right question to ask. They may not know exactly what it is. They think they do, right? They have an idea about it. But this is where you can help by understanding the consumer insights that you've done in the past, understanding the tools that you have at your disposal, better understanding the decision that needs to be made can create a greater equity investment from your internal client to believe in you and to know and to want to be invested in cooperating with you, collaborating with you. And it's an opportunity for you too to better understand the business and the business needs. And so, right, defining the question and making the question right, that gets you so far ahead. That's half the battle to creating useful decision grade insights. Absolutely, 1,000%. In my opinion.
Yeah. And obviously, I'm not going to disagree. You said something there that brought up another example of the idea of a company believing that they're data driven. And so we do a lot of brand work. So this is that idea of proving your worth to whoever you're in front of. So we do a lot of brand work. We have several brand agencies that we're their research department, if you want to call it that. But I mean, we're very close with them. We understand their ideas. They've helped illuminate us on the information they need to make the branding choices they do with their clients. And they bring us into almost all of their engagements. This one specifically in this industry. And when you were talking, I was going, here was truly, we're making the presentation. The brand agency is going to take all this and turn it into logos, naming, messaging, campaign. The company didn't even know what they needed. All right. When that brand guy stood there and said, yeah, we're going to do this and we're going to make this happen because you seem to think you want to do this. But did you know you need to understand these people's perception? Like, do you have any idea how your customers are going to feel about it? Well, no, not really. How about your non-customers? What your potential prospects, whatever you want to call them? Well, no, we really don't. And that's where we came to the party and then delivered a fire hose of information that just had them sitting back going, wow, yeah, we didn't know this. Back to your first point about they didn't know they had those questions. And where I'm going with this, so I'll land this plane. Where I'm going with this is when we were done, and obviously the brand guy is going to do all of his masterful work in changing the brand, very successful. But what got me was the president of this company is sitting there going, okay, it's one of those, hey, any last words before everybody gets off this presentation? It was a Zoom call, of course. And the president of the company's going, I just have to say, guys, I thought we had always said we're a data-driven company. But when you actually see data driving our decisions like this is really different.
Yeah.
And our agency's president, who was on the call, the agency that we work with very closely, kind of added what by this point was kind of obvious, which is, well, that's because now you really do know. And they didn't even know what they didn't know. So, I mean, you were just talking about that. And it's like, there's those stories where we can't ask leadership to do too much. This is not their game. Their game is running their business. Their game is making their business successful as it can be. Their game is, I want something else maybe, but I don't know how to get there. And you have to step in like we did and say, here's the information that will give the operators the ability to get you there. So that's the question part of it. But what about the second thing in this failure chain where the insight itself is a failure? This is kind of what we were talking about. There's just a lot of stuff being produced, but it doesn't inform anything that reduces a decision risk. It doesn't guide action. It's just, this is the type of presentation when people go, huh, yeah, well, that's interesting. Thank you. And they're gone. Nothing, nothing is going to change from that. Any examples of that one, Johnny?
I don't know why this came to mind. There was many years ago, a new marketing person came in and she had a friend who was a market research person who owned her own market research company. And she had done this exhaustive, comprehensive profile. I think, believe it or not, I want to say that the title of the presentation was What Women Want, because the place where I was at the time, their target audience was primarily female. And because she had this relationship with this woman and wanted to do her a solid, she wanted her to come in, and we were all mandated to come in and attend this presentation that this woman was going to make of all of this work that she had done to research, basically a profile of the American woman and what the American woman wants today. Oh my gosh. And she stood up and she It was a 124 slide presentation. And she says, now, of course, I'm not going to go through this entire presentation. And then she, of course, proceeded to go through all
The entire.
124 slides. And, it was just, 124 slides. You can
Yeah.
cover a lot of stuff in that time.
Yeah. Yeah.
Where do you like to buy clothes? When was the last time you bought clothes? What are the things that really bug you about education? How do you feel about politics? All kinds of stuff. Are you thinking about buying a car anytime soon? What do you like to see in a car? On and on. 124 slides of this. Okay. But at the end of it, all right,
Yeah.
what am I doing with it? I did my boss a solid by sitting in her friend's presentation for 2.5 hours, all 124 slides. There's nothing in it that I'm going to be able to take and say, oh, okay, you know what? We need to start doing this or we need to start doing that. It was what you said. It was informational, but there was nothing insightful about it. Like if she took that 124 slide presentation and tailored it to each place that she went into and, cut it down significantly, that would be useful. But my Lord, John, I lost, 2.5 hours of my life. And here's the weird thing. Well, not the weird thing, but the ironic thing about it is that woman, the market research person, actually wound up becoming quite nationally well known and a big political figure that everybody would know. And I was like, I had to watch her on TV for a long time, going like, what the hell? Are you kidding me? It's like, we'll never forget that. Having just slide after slide after, what do you think about the price of milk? How am I going to eat that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't even imagine how it could have been useful to anybody. But anyways.
Yeah. No, it brings up, I kind of actually love those kind of, again, everybody that's listening, I'm on the outside provider. I'm the expert consultant, as we've discovered.
You're the her, but without the 124 slides.
Yeah, exactly. I like those kind of presentations because they're perfect to sell against. So financial institution, industry, anyway, do a lot of work there as well. So truly, this out of the blue referral from another group that I work with, this lady gives me a call, and she's in that very different situation where she's not really heading research because she's got so much going on in marketing, but they kind of pointed at her and went, okay, well, you try to fix the problem. We think we're not getting what we need to get. So she had gotten referred. We spent about an hour on the phone. And I just remember asking her, so you're working with so and so. And now this was another external organization, huge in the industry. And I said, just help me understand, what do you think I can bring to the table that they're not? Because what are you getting? And she went through almost exactly what you just went through. As far as their last presentation had been 2.5, 3 hours. They tried to get their executives to sit through it. They couldn't. And I said, so can you tell me what was the difference? What happened between those people that are customers and those that are non-customers? Here's an insight failure. Number one, 2.5, 3 hour presentation, hundreds of pages of slides. They couldn't tell them who was a customer and who was a non-customer in the data. Yeah, I kid you not. And they had been buying this because this company sells this as an industry insight tool. And they don't even let a person know, here's what your actual customer thinks, and here's what your non customer thinks. They just have a bunch of pretty charts for about 200 and some odd pages. So I love selling against that kind of stuff. That is marvelous because, and let's just go back to them as an example. They had needs that they kind of knew what they wanted. They said, well, first of all, was you can tell us the difference between the two. It's like, oh yeah, we got a process for that. Okay. So that's not a problem. Once again, let's just take that off your worry list. What do you really want to do? What is it that you're going to be held accountable for? Okay. Well, we've got these 5 different areas. We own 2 of them. We're going into 3. we would love to know what's happening in those areas. And would you like to know that by the customer versus non-customer? Oh, yeah, that'd be just awesome. Do you think you could do that? Yeah, that's not a problem. And then, well, you know what? We've just had this massive work done inside. We didn't even know what we were going to do to use it, but it's this persona work, right? So we had just gotten done paying a huge amount of money to do this, and we're trying to market this way because we do think these 5 personas out of 12 or whatever we're in the area, these 5 are the growth segments. And you couldn't argue with them. I mean, they described them, and it's like, yeah, they kind of make sense. I'm not going to go and try to fight that. Do you want to know how those 5 personas in the 5 geographic markets, how they think, customer versus non? You can do that. So that was definitely a point where very similar situation was my first person through the door. And then I basically had to go in and help them fix that because the first person through the door had, you know what, I'm going to sell you this Airbud thing. And this is what it is. So, it's this size. It has this graph and that's it. You want it? You don't? This is what I got. And the difference being to get a real insight they could act on, you actually had to figure it out. You had to figure out what they were going to be doing with their budgets for the next year. You look like you're ready to pounce. I'll let you.
What you just said, in a way, what I'm thinking about is, like you said, insight failure. And in that case, it's like if you allow the person to come in and frame the question for you, because the only question they can answer is the one that they've designed the research to do. So whether it's really your question or not, whether you really have a business need around that or not, it's like, here's what I have. Let's backfit it into something that you haven't asked or that you don't need.
Yeah.
And so this is where the one kind of flows into the other, right? In a way.
Yeah.
It's like, what's the right question? If you don't have the right question, you're going to have an insight failure.
Yeah.
One leads to the other. So,
yeah.
All right. What's next?
All right. On this little ladder, there's the owner failure. So
are we going down the ladder?
Yeah, we're going down the ladder. Are we going up? Well, we're going left to right. So you've got your whole question, then you've got the insight, you've got your action, and then the impact. So the action. Okay. So what about insight failure number 3? What about it? There's no owner. So it goes into the organization. No leader has any kind of reason for making a decision based off it. There's got no place for that insight to land. And this, we don't need to go back and redo the whole story. This is that story we told before, and where you raise the insight up to the right decision maker to where they got fed the insight, whether they wanted to or not. And actually were able to make a really good, in their mind, good, well-informed, had all the information, had all the insights. It was in the right architecture as a decision to be made, right people in the room, didn't make what we thought would be the right decision, but it didn't matter. They were able to do that and felt really good about the decision they made. You know what story I'm talking about there. So,
yeah. I mean, what you're talking about is just basically, no matter how good the information and the insights are, if there's not somebody who's either willing to own the decision, or if you're not in the room with the right owner of that decision, then it's a waste of time. And from your side, it's about understanding who you're going to be presenting to, who the actual decision makers are. And it's all dovetails. I mean, it sounds like we're repeating ourselves, but it all dovetails. It's like understanding the question, understanding the decision that needs to be made. But you're right. It's not only understanding the decision that needs to be made, but who has that decision? Who's going to own that decision? Who can make that call? And that's an important thing, because you have to understand, one of the things that's really difficult from my side of it is sometimes you wind up doing some work and you do some great work or whatever, and you present it, and then it's gratifying because you get chased up the ladder. But it's sort of like, how many times am I going to have to present this before I'm in the one office with the one person who can actually go like, oh yeah, this is great, let me do something with it, when it's like, you could have had this a week ago, 2 weeks ago, if only, So yes, ownership, but that speaks to internal problems potentially from both my side of the fence and your side of the fence. A little bit that's understanding, once again, the politics, understanding the structure, and understanding like it's not just the right question, but who is the question coming from? Where does the decision actually rest? Because that is the person whom you need to truly impact. The story that you told a while ago about, well, the outdoor, you know,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Yeah.
outdoor company. At the end of the day, you wound up speaking to the one person in the room who actually had, you know, the authority and the will to make that call. You could have made that speech 12 times over, but if you hadn't made it when you did in front of the one person that you needed to do, right? And so you were in front of the owner of that decision. And that's what made all the difference.
Yeah. Yeah, it really was. And actually, let me get to our ladder, whether we're going up or down. I don't know, left or right. We're at the very last one. And so here's the action. Okay. Are you influencing the action? Failure number 4, calling it the risk failure. This is where whatever is being found out, it's not like it's not being found out, but whatever is being found out is just not reducing enough risk that it's actually being acted upon. It's just more interest and curiosity and everything. And I think the prime example of this one, which I was stunned when I saw it. So customer experience is huge. You know this. I mean, that whole idea of the net promoter score and, you're contacted after you do an interaction, et cetera, et cetera. Customer experience industry, that's what that is. Huge. But they're a perfect example of this. There's actually a journalist who's been watching this industry for a long time, and he points to this failure mode, and the point is really blunt. He said something along the lines of, even customers get that they know they're not providing anything that's going to be used. And they get it because they're answering generic, basic questions. There's nothing they're answering in the question even they know is mission critical to the company they have a relationship with. And they know it.
Yeah.
They feel it.
Yeah.
Okay. So his whole point was, this is what's leading to the dropping response rates. If you know that industry, the response rates have dropped off the cliff. And it's not that the customer doesn't want to be heard or doesn't care. They've actually recognized the game in that industry, and they're not responding because they don't believe it changes anything. So when you really think about it, they're probably 100% correct. Now, he wasn't necessarily just saying, don't do that. That's a dangerous leap, because then you have a whole customer experience program and you're not even talking to your customers. I've been there, done that before research even started taking off. We were trying to convince executives and anybody that would hear us that, boy, you should talk to your customer. So I don't want to go through those days again, but it's really, maybe it's not that the customer input doesn't matter. That's not what the problem is. What's happening is the customer just is realizing the same game as well. They don't want to be treated like a data source. They want to be a decision partner. You and I have felt that when you do qualitative work, that you get engagement when you're talking about a real decision that's going to be made by the company. I mean, you can see it when you have people in front of you. They go, oh, they're thinking about that? And you're talking to me? Oh, sure. Let's go. So anyway, I don't know if you've got a story like that. It's just a quantitative response where you're like looking them in the eyes. They can feel it. And they can feel it in a quantitative study too.
Yeah, you certainly can. Some companies, you can feel that. And yet then the company is also able to say, well, we're building surveys. We're being data driven. I can tell when I respond to some things that the question that I really want to answer isn't being asked. It does remind me a little bit. Sad, this person never would have known whether or not they had anything to do with it or whatever, but we were doing focus groups. I was showing some content and we were collecting responses and feedback from the focus group respondents. And it didn't go terribly. It wasn't a home run, put it that way.
Yeah.
And one of the people said, what would really be good about this? What you could do is you could start, if you did this, that, or the other. And the producer got up in a fury and stormed out the door and goes, don't tell me how to make my show. just tell me whether or not you like it. It's like, but if you would listen, she wants to tell you maybe she would watch it if you would just listen. You don't have to do it, but at least listen to it, right?
Yeah.
So those are frustrating. But oh man, he didn't listen to the rest of the group. He got up and stormed out because she was, trying to offer an opinion.
Okay. Okay. Now you're bringing up story time. Very early in my career doing focus groups for a home builder in our area. Yeah, it's not worth going into detail there. Just a home builder. We have people who are interested in buying homes in the session. The problem was behind the glass, there was in the wall that had the one-way mirror, there was a door directly from the back room where the client was into the room where I'm talking with people. And a couple of the people just started actually arguing about how horrible. They didn't know who this was for or anything, but they picked up on a couple of developments that this builder had done.
Oh.
And oh my word, they just went back and forth about how bad he was as a builder. And they're paying for the group. And I'm trying to get them off of that and onto the new development. And they could not get past the fact that this builder was just so awful and what they had done before. And we sure hope to heck he's not got his hands on this project. Well, that would be horrible. He came flying through the door and literally, now this is a few years ago, gray hair, a few years ago, literally held the participant by the neck up to the wall and started raging at them. I'm running out the door going, anybody got security? He's a big guy. I ain't taking this on. I'm a pretty big guy. He was a big guy. He was in construction back when you didn't have administrators. You had builders. So it was like, we just need to get this under control. That was, end of that group. It's interesting how people respond differently because there was that response. Did another one for a CPG company in the canned chili world. And I mean, we were doing the taste test and it was going horribly, just horribly. They honestly were tasting it going, yeah, it's all right. But man, this was just kind of a little bit different. And yet, after a couple of minutes, it kind of sits okay. And you take a break, go back, man, is there anything you can do to get a positive thing out of them? I'm trying. This is what you've got. You've got to listen to what they're saying. They stay behind the glass. There was no door there. Learned my lesson. But they stayed behind the glass. And what came out of it was one of the participants who was a buyer, heavy buyer in the category, said, you know what? If you called this so that we all knew what it was, if you just like advertise it like dog breath chili, we'd buy this stuff. In the back, you could just see the light bulbs going off with the marketers. And it was one of their biggest success stories. I kid you not. They had it in the market. They got the shelf space and they literally called it. Their ads were hilarious. But, if you want your dog breath chili, go eat this. And it just flew off the shelf.
Wow.
Just flew off the shelf. So, I mean, it's really interesting because both were perceived negatives. One just went and ran with it. The other one, of course, did have to work with his reputation and everything. But obviously, from the way he responded, it was deserved. So anyway, wow, he's got me started. We've got so many war stories.
You can decide to act on it positively, or you can decide to not act on it. Actually, I guess we have one who acted negatively, one who didn't act at all, and one who acted positively. But yes,
Yeah.
That's an action success story and maybe 2 action failures.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes.
Exactly. Well, where I'm going with this now that we've successfully
land the plane, Johnny. Land the plane.
We've either gone up a ladder, down a ladder, or side to side one way or another. I am going to introduce the actionable insight to impact method, AIM as we call it, because that really is the leadership system that creates a fix for all of this stuff that we're talking about. It starts with the idea. And it's important to understand this is the idea behind the system to design the intelligence that you're going to need around your decision environment, not the research environment. And I think that was clear from many of the stories you heard even today, let alone the first two episodes. But the reason for that, and I've got a real example of this, it's kind of the opposite of what happened with the first story. People that close the gap do something differently. They design the intelligence around the decision environment. AIM starts with 3 leadership questions, and these 3 things have to exist. So we're going to have a Venn diagram here very shortly. It's going to show you that you've got clarity in one circle, you've got ownership, and you've got uncertainty. Clarity, what is the decision that actually matters? Ownership, who owns it, the decision? Who's going to make the decision? What leader is the one that needs to be spoken to? And then uncertainty, what is a risk that must be reduced in order to act? And insight that actually becomes impactful is the intersection of those 3 things. It stops being information, it becomes decision power. At that intersection is the definition of decision grade intelligence. And this is how leaders turn customer understanding into strategic advantage. Johnny, what say you to that?
I just keep going back to what you said last week. Consequence versus curiosity.
Yeah. Yeah. That is a good one, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah. And information that it becomes an artifact versus an impact. So when you're talking about actual insight, and as I just mentioned, that framework, so to speak, it's not just something that is to be admired, it's to engineer the insight. And I have proof, and this is that story that is different than what we just heard. It's about a company. Most people have never heard of this company. It's not in a sexy AI-driven industry. It's in an industry that the founder-led company is the legacy owner of it. Physical goods category hasn't changed that much in decades. No hype, no buzzwords, no real playbook for how growth is supposed to occur. Now, this newcomer, they had a great product, they had a passionate following, and they were, by all standards of their day, very successful. But they were stuck, and they were boxed in as a niche player, and the ceiling was very real. They had made every decision they possibly could to achieve as much success as they possibly could, and they had been very successful, but they were capped. They didn't know what else to do more, and they wanted to do more. So they looked at traditional research. Now, much of this, like the company that we talked about earlier, was being done. It gave them really logical answers. So it said, well, here's a competitor you should look like so that you can get their share of the market. Anyway, very logical things were being shared with them from the information they were getting. I wouldn't call it necessarily insights. It's, again, your story about the 124 pages or whatever just comes to mind. But none of those answers changed what leadership actually did. And the reason was because none of that work was tied to where the company wanted to go. And once you knew where the company wanted to go, it completely changed the type of questions that needed to be answered. So when we were brought in, we just did something completely different. We just stepped back. We looked at what they had done, but we weren't looking at it from the idea that everybody else had been looking at it, which is, oh, we got to optimize our differences here, and we've got to optimize the features. And they're basically chasing what we call incremental improvements. We stepped back and we said, okay, we think what you really need to understand is, how do real people actually see your category? And they went, we already know. I mean, it's in the sales data. Well, have you talked to them? Well, no, but it's in the sales data. But let's keep going a little bit further. Who do you think they're choosing between? Oh, that's obvious. It's competitor A and competitor B. Those are, yeah, I mean, we do something different, but it's got to be those guys. How do you know? Oh, we don't really know, but something told us that in everything we're looking at. So does that mean that's where you should go? Well, we don't know that. We don't want to be them. We want to be bigger. Okay. Well, who cares if that's where you fit or not, right? So the human realities that were shaping the decisions, they didn't know. So they were acting on success, defining it with various things, but it never stopped and said, if we actually knew the answers to these questions, we could actually do something which we want to do, which is run the whole category. I mean, that's what we want, is to take over this thing. We've been successful. We've got a ceiling. We want to change that. So we went in, did our special stuff with our secret sauce, using this framework. Everything that we learned challenged almost every internal assumption. Who they thought their competitor was, who the customers were comparing them to, where they thought the growth would come from, where the customers found value. These are really big deal questions from the leader's decision-making perspective. And if you know the answers to those, their actions, at least, they couldn't help but be impacted. And this wasn't just able to be answered in a one-off study. We started small, and we kind of did this year upon year, engineering the insight, the groups in marketing, the groups in brand, the groups in Marcoms kept changing and adapting to what they were learning, seeing the effect from year to year with real growth that we predicted. And then it turned out to be true. And then leadership starts, kind of like our story as well, John. Leadership is sitting up here going, you guys are doing something in Marcom that's different. Branding is different. What's going on? And all of a sudden, we're in full meetings with the board, with the full team. And pretty soon we're in front of the entire company. And everybody is sitting there, in, especially these last 2 years, just going, okay, you get to a part in the pres, and we do it all in once, but you get to a part and you've got one part of the room writing notes. You get to another part. Everybody's getting their questions answered with everything that we're put together to know what they need to have answered. So the discipline that we engineered with the insights and them being able to make a change, and they're a great team, by the way. This is one of those things where I literally stand up in front of them and I go, you guys are acting on this? I mean, thank you. Thank you. This is so cool to me, because it's so fun then to watch you be so successful because you're acting on this. I did my best to get it to you. You're just like making my day, because you're the ones that are making it actually work. If you didn't do this, nobody would even care. Nobody would know, but you also wouldn't be growing. You wouldn't have gone past your ceiling. So it was really fun. Like, it has been fun over the years to be a part of this company's progression, I guess you would say. And it's interesting because it didn't just change where they allocated resources. It changed their ambition. And ultimately, they acted on it to change their position. They didn't just end up growing. They did. And then they became the talk of the town with articles and that kind of stuff. But what they did went beyond that is, just a few short years after starting that process, they ended up acquiring the original industry founders. So they went from a small niche player, very successful, to acquiring the category founder. They lead the whole industry, and it was all done in a few short years. So that's my point, that the first story is very, very typical in some ways. And then you presented it saying, well, it kind of is, but there's another side of it where it's resource scarce. But this is what I think I live for, is this idea that when insight isn't treated as a project or some interesting information artifact, but it's an operating system per se, it's a decision, architecture, infrastructure. This stuff works.
Yeah.
It just flat works. Anything to add to that? And then I will land the plane.
No, it's a tremendous success story. And the other thing about it is not just that they were like acting on this stuff, but that they made a real commitment to the process. Because it's very rare to be able to go year after year after year like that and actually see the progression. So it was a commitment, not just from them internally to utilizing the stuff, but a commitment to the process. Yeah. And that's laudable. Yep. Anyways.
Yeah, it's been fun. Hopefully it's not a journey that's ended at this point, because they're one of the big ones.
About to start on the next phase.
Yeah, it'll be different. It's different moving forward. Every place that you're going in your own growth as a company, the needs become different. But anyway, so here's what we've covered in this episode. Just land this plane. Insight fails predictably at various points in the decision process. We went through those on the ladder up or the ladder down, not sure which. Most insight work isn't so much that it's wrong, it's just irrelevant to the decisions that matter. And then if no one owns a decision, there's no way for insight to land the plane anywhere inside the company. And then great insight cannot overcome bad decision architecture. We had a couple of examples of that. And then there's also the systems that are acting exactly the way that they should because of how they're built. It's just they were built incorrectly. So, one final thought here. Most people in companies think we should just have more analytics, we should have more dashboards, we should have more AI. But the story we started with today tells us something different. That company didn't lack insight. They had the brand trackers, they had the customer experience programs. I forgot to mention they had the advanced AI tools, competitive intelligence. And I would guesstimate that many of the insights from that massive amount of work were answering the wrong questions. But mostly a lot of the stuff was just ignored in terms of the leadership. So what they definitely lacked was something more important. They lacked that system for turning intelligence into a decision. And once you understand that, you start to realize that insight teams aren't the only reason intelligence fails to influence strategy or decision making. Leadership plays a major contributor in that. Johnny and I have shared a couple of great stories about that. So if you're a leader of any type, the real question you should be asking isn't, do we have enough customer insight? The real question is, have we designed a company where intelligence can actually influence decisions? Because even when intelligence reaches leaders, there is something they still need, and that is the one final obstacle. I think Johnny mentioned it last time, the trust ladder. It's trust, and we'll be getting into that in our next episode, how to gain that, how to earn it, how to keep it. That's why people in leadership roles act on customer intelligence with confidence while others ignore it completely. And that's a question that we'll tackle in the next episode. Any parting words, John?
Not a one, sir. I think we've covered it.
All right. I'll wrap us up. Again, all this is exactly why we built the Actionable Insight to Impact method, or AIM for short, a way to ensure the work of bringing your customer into the decision-making process. So it doesn't just generate insight, it generates your executive confidence that is required to act on it. So decision makers, if you're listening and you're an agency lead, a marketing exec, a business exec within a company, large or small, or consulting with them from the outside, and you need someone to work with so that you can ask the right questions, get you the right answers that you need in order to make a decision that has lasting impact and difference, drop me an email at john@bershekresearch.com and let's talk. Thank you very much for listening today.